Digimon Story Time Stranger is honestly a runaway success, surprising even me, a huge Digimon fan who has been championing for this game since before we knew what its title was. It's been getting really good reviews, great user reviews, being streamed by people like Moist Critical and Pat Stares At. By the way, I'm officially launching my campaign to get on Castle Super Beast. I'm like super chill, Pat and Wooly, I love Digimon. You want to be annoyed by a Digimon nerd for an hour? I'm your guy. Topping Steam sales numbers charts and much more, with actual sales yet to come out, and a confirmed season pass of DLC that I talked about the other day, featuring story additions and 5 new Mega Digimon per wave. It still weirdly begs the question, what's next for Digimon games? What is up, digital companions? My name is Karn EX and welcome back to another video, and if it's not welcome back, please hit that subscribe button. We're getting so juicily close to 100,000 subscribers, and I know it's so cringe when YouTubers ask, and especially when they show you the graphic which tells you this is how many people are watching my videos and aren't subscribed, but when I ask, you tend to do it and it helps the channel immensely, meaning that more people take interest, more brands come to the channel, and we get to do more cool stuff. And this, dear viewer, is where there was supposed to be a sponsor that I was segueing into, but as I delve deeper into it, unfortunately, their interests and mine did not align, if that makes sense. Certain chains got blocked. So instead of a sponsor, I'd really appreciate it if you have the hype function on mobile. I would love it if you hype this video, get more people to see it. Subscribe, as I said before, of course. And as we're not going to be getting the sponsor on this video, I would love it if you consider going over to patreon.com/KarnEX, joining up and helping support independent Digimon videos and custom art videos. Thank you. And huge shout out to my Fang Longmon Golden God tier Lupus Lichlord. And yeah, it's been kind of crazy, hasn't it? With Moist Critical streaming the game and indeed getting referenced in the game, Pat Stares At streaming it, a bunch of other creators, VTubers, etc. streaming it. The game's been popping off, and like I said in the intro, the Steam numbers reflect that. And we still don't even know what the console sales for physical and digital even look like, really. The thing with all this hype, though, is that you don't know what's going to come next, other than, of course, we know there's a season pass. I think Digimon really needs to capitalize on this momentum, and that's why I'm really happy that we have things like Digimon Beat Break, Digimon Liberator, the Digimon TCG, Digimon Elysian. It's a massive year for Digimon, and that's gonna spill out into 2026, 2027 and beyond. However, the big question is, what now? What's next specifically for Digimon games? Because a lot of people probably don't know this, but the mobile game side of things and the TCG side of things are completely different departments. They don't really interact with each other than to request assets or Digimon that each can use. So no one in like Hara, Media Vision, the people that watch my videos in Digimon Creative are working on Elysian. There might be people on Elysian that do watch my content, but I haven't talked to them. So I'm not talking about Elysian here, I'm talking about console and PC Digimon games. And I think the first most likely thing that we need to see is a Season Pass 2 for Digimon Story Time Stranger. We know the first Season Pass is going to be distributed by September of next year. However, I have heard some talk and some indication that the Season Pass might take way less time to come out, meaning that we could be done with it more like March 2026. My great hope then would be that we could have more DLC for Time Stranger, and I know DLC for a single player game is always going to be a little bit meh. However, I've seen a lot of requests for Digimon that simply aren't in the game. The Frontier Spirits, Meikumon and its evolutions, Victory Greymon and Zed Garurumon, more Cross Wars representation, more X-antibodies, and the DLC doesn't seem to be taking care of this, so that's a big factor. But another factor is people want more story in their Digimon story game. And to me, really, while adding Digimon in DLC is fun, I feel much more vindicated and I guess respected in having paid money for a single player season pass when I do get a decent chunk of story content. I'm really hoping each of the DLC waves has a good amount of story, not so much the side mission length story we get, like the one for the public safety costume, which I think takes about 60 seconds to complete, maybe 2 minutes. So I think that's the first natural thing they should do, a season pass 2, maybe even a season pass 3, switching up what they do for each season pass, not locking it to 5 Mega Digimon, but instead maybe evolution routes, things like the spirits, etc. And then maybe also use the season passes as opportunities to do other stuff, add more challenges to the outer dungeon, more unique little mini games and stuff that you can do there. Maybe seed NPCs throughout the various locations of Time Stranger, then maybe add new areas when you go to do missions with them, or create challenges within rather than the outer dungeons, the biomes of Digimon Story Time Stranger, where you get to, defeat a bunch of Digimon or whatever. Basically add new little side quests that are in the lush, beautiful forest, the sparkling sea of the Abyss area, or even the Cosmic area. A lot of people also do still want PvP in this game, and I don't think this is the right game for it personally. I think it's actually a very good idea that Digimon Story has moved away from trying to be like Pokemon. I think what's great is seeing all these Pokemon fans jump ship to Digimon and realizing that actually it's more like an SMT game with monster raising elements. And in that vein, I wouldn't be looking for like Persona 5 or Metaphor Refantasio to have PvP either. I would rather the game was balanced for the story moments and the boss fights than balanced for a PvP. However, I think a Digimon World game would be good for PvP, and I think in fact the best place to put a PvP in future, maybe even a full-on multiplayer soft MMO function. But if people really want it, I guess you do have to listen to your audience and work out the perception and percentage of those people, and maybe PvP could be added. I mean, I still think it would be an absolutely broken mess given how it's been historically in story games, but you know, if people want it, who am I to say they shouldn't have it? I think if enough people want it, add it. It doesn't hurt anything to be added, does it? As long as, again, they don't rebalance the main story to be actually worse because of PvP balancing. However, if PvP gets its own balancing, maybe Digimon have altered stats in PvP or something, I think that could be a good way to do it. For the record though, I do not think trading should be a thing in these games. If anything, the DLC Digimon, specifically the Bond evolutions, have proven being just given a really strong Digimon early doors is just game breaking nearly. But okay, DLC is great, but like I say, it's also kind of the worst, especially for single player games. What about a proper new title? Well, I think the absolute best thing they could do going forward for the Digimon Story brand, and specifically Digimon Story Time Stranger, is to do a hacker's memory again. And when I say this, I'm not talking about the same type of story. I'm not saying, oh, there has to be secretly this character that was doing all of the stuff in the background this whole time in the same time frame as Digimon Story Time Stranger, but I'm talking about basically a game that reuses a ton of assets and the engine to make a new game quicker. Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth originally released in 2015, and about 2.5 years later, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Hacker's Memory released. This is notably a much smaller gap than the gap between Hacker's Memory 2017 and Time Stranger 2025, getting on for almost a decade. And indeed, it was an entire decade between Cyber Sleuth and Time Stranger. So I think as we're looking at probably a year or so before the DLC is done and a complete edition for Time Stranger to come out, maybe on the Switch 2, which I also think is incredibly likely. I do think we are going to be seeing that Switch 2 release end of 2026, maybe 2027. Why not do a Hacker's Memory equivalent, a Majora's Mask, a Final Fantasy X-2? You have so much built already. All you need to do is maybe create some new environments, new characters, maybe add more to real world Japan, something I've become a champion of actually. And this is spoilers for Time Stranger a little bit, so if you want to skip this bit, feel free. Timestamp is below and in the description. I think it'd be really cool if we got a game that covered those 8 years. We jump past in Time Stranger, and while there are side quests which tell us about some things that happened, and obviously the main story also tells us what happened in those 8 years, there's tons you could elaborate on. I personally think Asuna is the natural person to put in there as the Keisuke equivalent of a Hacker's Memory equivalent to Time Stranger. Again, she's not a brand new character, she was in Time Stranger, but she's actually got a ton of parallels to our main character. First of all, she's one of few human characters to get a outright Digimon partner in Black Gatomon and eventually Bielstarmon. Secondarily, she's another character who gets a notable costume change, which we also do, admittedly usually not ludonarratively, we just get costume changes from buying them from stores or from DLC. However, Asuna also gets a costume change, and what is her costume change based on? Oh, that's right, Agent Alpha. The same thing that our costume seems to be based on. I'm not going to spoil more. I would suggest something like a Digimon Story Time Stranger Agent's Journey, or Agent's Chapter, or Agent's File, something like that, which follows us playing as Asuna. Yes, we wouldn't get to choose our gender presentation because we'd be playing as Asuna, but guess what? We didn't get to do that in Hacker's Memory either. Also, we could still get to play as other characters too, like Kuroe. Plus, I think the Black Gatomon that eventually becomes a Bielstarmon would be perfect to fill our guest spot instead of Aegiomon. Initially, we have a guest Black Gatomon and then other Digimon we recruit. Yes, we would know the fate of Asuna because we meet her in Time Stranger, but so many things could happen. We could meet new characters, explore those 8 years of Digimon and human interaction. I think it's a fantastic idea. But of course, they don't have to do that. They could do a story set before all of this or after. Follow a different character. Follow, for example, Inori's brother. Maybe he didn't die right at the end of that prelude. Maybe he's still out there somewhere in the digital world, you know? See what happened to him and his Justimon. We could make a whole story out of that too. That begs the question though, if we don't get this, or if we do get this, what comes after? What is the Digimon games franchise looking like into the future? Well, my assumption would be that they would make a Digimon World game next. Though personally, I'm hoping for a Digimon Survive 2. I know Digimon Survive is probably one of the most divisive titles in Digimon's history. However, I think the foundations there are fantastic. fantastic. And if you can improve on things, adding skippable cutscenes, making the tactical RPG elements much more important, really making your choices matter more, giving you a bunch more endings like more prominent visual novels recently, I do genuinely think Survive could be a fantastic franchise in its own right. But let's do a really fun and not at all boring thing and look at numbers, the things that ultimately are going to decide what Bandai Namco does next. We don't really know how much the original Digimon World 1 on PS1 sold. We do have some hypothesis and speculation that it sold in the realm of 1 million copies. It has to have sold a certain amount to have become a greatest hits release in North America, and a platinum hit in Europe, as this post on With the Will from 2007 says. So theoretically, it could have sold over 500,000 and possibly into the 1 million copies, which makes sense more for the lasting legacy, the amount of people who are familiar with Digimon World and just the games industry at the time. However, moving forward into the Digimon World subgenre or franchise, the sales really aren't that fantastic. There's been a bunch of Digimon World games, but I'd say the most well-known after Digimon World 1 and the most well-received was Digimon World Next Order, which originally released only a year after Cyber Sleuth in 2016, and then got ported to PS4 the year after, and then eventually ported to PC and Switch in 2023. And it took a whole year after that, October 23rd, 2024, for Digimon Games to tweet that Digimon World Next Order has sold 1 million copies worldwide. And that's great, that's a huge achievement. But that post was 2024, meaning that all versions of Digimon World Next Order, the Vita, PS4, Switch, and Windows version, took 8 years to sell 1 million copies. It's a good sale number, but it took a long time to get there. In comparison, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory, we know have sold more than 2.5 million units as of Digimon Con 2025 this year. Now that is 2 titles, admittedly, and their sales get really confusing because they released individually on the Vita and then they're released individually and together on consoles, but still, split it right down the middle, that's 1.25 million copies each in roughly the same time period. I mean, add a year or so here and there. We then have Digimon Survive, which unfortunately has not had updated sales numbers since basically the year it came out. However, Digimon Survive released in July of 2022, and by December of 2022, that same year, only 5 months, had sold 500,000 copies. My suspicion is if by now it had sold 1 million copies, we might have already seen a post from Digimon Games stating this, though of course we don't know that to be certain. However, 500,000 copies in 5 months is certainly a bigger upswing than the 1 million copies it took like 7-8 years for World Next Order to sell, which is why, as a reminder, even if you may not like it, Digimon Survive was not a failure. It is one of the best-selling standalone visual novels of all time, and because its budget was nowhere near as high as a lot of other Digimon games, also probably recouped a great deal of profit. It is actually way more likely that Survive, from a strictly sales perspective, is a better value proposition for Bandai Namco right now than a new World game. That is sadly the reality, is that World games don't sell that well. I think overall it's probably the most well-known subgenre of Digimon game, but anecdotally, Digimon World 1 and World Next Order are probably our best-selling titles, and they don't sell more than 1 million copies. Whereas we know Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory together sold 2.5 million. But of course, they aren't the most recent Digimon games, are they? The most recent Digimon game is Digimon Story Time Stranger, which unfortunately we don't have sales numbers for. However, there are some things that we can interpret at this stage in the game. We know, for example, that Digimon Story Time Stranger had an all-time peak of 83,857 concurrent players on Steam, with Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Complete Edition only hitting an all-time peak of 3,408. Now, this isn't a great comparison because the Steam version of Cyber Sleuth Complete Edition came out way after the Vita and console versions, so it's not like it was building on launch hype. Though for another comparison between Story and World, when World Next Order debuted on Steam, it only hit a peak of 1,669. As of recording, Digimon Story Time Stranger still has an active player base of 23,495 as of an hour ago, with 27,000 being the 24-hour peak. Funnily enough, Digimon Survive actually is higher than World Next Order and Cyber Sleuth Complete Edition on Steam, but again, it did release at the same time as its other platforms on Steam, so that 6,179 all-time peak indicates that it was launch week. However, we can compare Digimon Story Time Stranger to another really well-selling SMT-like RPG which launched on console and Steam at the same time, Metaphor ReFantazio, which hit a slightly higher all-time peak of 85,194, but it's pretty comparable. Honestly, it's insane that Time Stranger came even close to an Atlas SMT-esque game. And Metaphor probably does actually help us give an indication of where we might look at for sales for Time Stranger. They're very comparable games. Their graphical setup, while the graphical assets and graphical look is different, is pretty comparable. That kind of intentionally late PS2, early PS3 kind of vibe, but obviously with much higher quality textures, etc. They're not pushing for the hyper-realism of a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth because they don't want the budget to go there, and honestly it makes more sense financially. Metaphor ReFantazio reached 2 million units sold in June 2025. Not even a full year after it released in October of 2024. And apparently Metaphor ReFantazio sold 1 million copies the day it released. Now, I'm not expecting Time Stranger to hit those numbers, but honestly it could come really close in this first year. Time Stranger doing roughly only like 2,000 less peak concurrence on Steam than Metaphor might mean that it did hit 1 million sales at least in launch month, across Steam, PS5, Xbox Series X and S. But this is really where the only stickler comes in with Metaphor. Metaphor also released on PS4, and that is a big user base. A lot of people have still not upgraded to the PS5, either because they don't want to or because they can't afford it. So the game being available on PS4 is important and could shift how easy the comparison between it and Time Stranger is. However, Metaphor ReFantazio also got added to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate in May 2025, which may actually have shelved some sales as people wouldn't have bought it if they had access to Game Pass, so it could be more comparable than we think. I am almost certain that in the first year Digimon Story Time Stranger will have sold 1 million copies. However, I think by next year, say a year from launch, a little bit longer than it took Metaphor ReFantazio, we really could see this game hit 2 million sales. We know that physical copies in Japan were selling like hotcakes and a lot of retailers ran out, although really it wasn't that difficult to get your hands on a physical copy, and of course digital was always an option. It also got caught up in the storm of anti-Nintendo, anti-Pokemon sentiment online, and even people who aren't particularly against Pokemon, maybe just disenfranchised or not super hyped by ZA, picked up Time Stranger because it was on more platforms, not just on the Switch and Switch 2, and was Steam Deck verified before launch, so you knew you could play it portably on Steam Deck, ROG Ally, etc. Everything, all the writing on the wall to me indicates that Digimon Story is the type of Digimon game that Digimon should focus on going forward. Not that they shouldn't make Digimon World, Digimon Survive, maybe a new Rumble Arena, or what I want to see a 2D fighting game, but looking at metrics alone, just based on what we already know about Time Stranger and based on the years of Cyber Sleuth, it is by far and away the best-selling type of Digimon game. So whether we get a new Digimon Story game unrelated to Time Stranger in the next 5-10 years or not, maybe we will get a new World game or a new Survive game, I think the best foot forward is to do that Hacker's Memory equivalent I talked about, a brand new game that can be between 30 and 100 plus hours, keep milking that hype for Time Stranger, make new content for Digimon fans and big dumb idiot Digimon YouTubers like me, and keep that hype around the Digimon brand going, while you also still of course have like anime, mobile games, TCG, etc. Let me know in the comments down below though, what do you want to see from the future of Digimon games? I obviously want more Digimon Story games, they're my favorite type apart from Survive. I do want to see Survive 2 though, let them know you want to see it on social media. Thank you to my Fanglongmon tier, Lupus Lichlord, and my sovereigns, ZDK14, Chaotic Prophet, and Jeremy Babineau, as well as everyone else who supports me over on patreon.com/Karn EX, and my amazing channel members here on YouTube too. Thank you for clicking that join button down below, or maybe you got gifted on a live stream and you should pay it forward. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time when we go digital. Bye bye.